Okay, before we actually start building our material, we can do a quick overview here in what I did for my test. And you can see it's a pretty simple thing. In fact, what we're going to end up doing is doing a lot of cutting and pasting for the general setup in through here. And we're just going to repeat it for all the different channels. So we've actually already done most of the work in what we did in Photoshop. The only thing we're really going to do different is we're going to add this subsurface scattering output. So I'm going to come into File, New Substance, and we'll call this Fabric 2 because I've already made a Fabric 1, and like I said, this is actually for something I'm doing, so I'm saving myself the trouble. You can call it whatever you want to call it. And straight away, I'm going to go ahead and make that scattering. I'm going to call this Subsurface. And by duplicating it, I actually just kept that group. If you want to make a new one, you go Add Node, Output, and then you can create a new output. The key thing here, though, is the usage. And they don't have a subsurface scattering per se, but they do have these generic scattering output. So we're just going to use scatter 0. And the other thing I'm going to do, just because that's how I like things, is I'm going to move my height next to my normal. And that is our outputs sorted out. The next thing we need to do is to actually link up that stuff we made in Photoshop. Now, we could import them. You can import a bitmap, but that would break the connection to any refreshes that we do. So by linking it, it'll automatically refresh if we resave it out from Photoshop as something slightly different. And I like to do this because it means it's a lot easier to tweak things if you have to go back to Photoshop. You don't have to worry about re-importing it. And these are the things that we made, and we're just going to import them. Actually, I should say link them. And it creates a new resources folder where it will drop these things. You can also link 3D meshes. You can't import them, by the way, but you can link them as vector graphics as well. Fonts, too, for that matter. If you start importing if you start linking or importing a lot of things in here, it's going to just dump them into this big folder here. So you can always rename folders, and you can always make new folders. There you go, folder. And it's just a better way of keeping things organized because this can get completely out of control. Now I'm just going to drag them into my graph, and I'm going to use them all as grayscale maps. So why don't we go ahead and take care of that. And then before we actually get building, you'll notice that I had one more noise in here, which was white noise. And we're going to use this white noise. I'm going to bring that up to 2K. We're going to use this white noise to kind of rough up the surfaces of some of these larger maps. This is like really smooth and white. I mean, once we start making a fabric, it's going to give us a very smooth surface. We're going to use this white noise to break that surface up a bit and give it some fuzziness. And the only other thing we're going to need from the library, which I might as well get now, is going to be a bevel. And the bevel is going to basically just give us the height. Because in terms of height maps, if we used this, it would be a disaster. We would have like all these little points, and it'd be horrible. It wouldn't work. It's always best to keep the height map pretty simple. And if we think about this fabric that we're envisioning, we're thinking this is the knobbier, thicker bit of the fabric, and then this is going to be smoother, but that means it's also thinner and it's going to be lower. So that's going to be our height map, and we're going to use this bevel to get it to have like a soft edge. Otherwise, everything is pretty much done, and it's just a question of hooking it up and picking our colors. So let's start with the color. I'm going to get 3 of them here, and these 2 are going to be for our pattern, and then this will be for whatever our metallic thread is. I'm thinking a blue-ish kind of thing, so I'll pick a couple of colors that I like. that I think will make a nice pattern. And I think I'll go with a silver thread, and we'll get a blend node, and we'll use our pattern, and then we'll get a second blend node, and we'll apply our thread. And we will hook that up to our base color. You know, I just realized we never made an ambient occlusion either, so let's go ahead and make one of those. And we have something to work with now. I'm going to put a temporary white on this ambient occlusion, and I will then view the one node in 3D view, and then we can actually assign it its usage. Next, let's do the height, because that's really easy. So like I said, we're going to use this with the height, and you can make this as, you know, as soft as you want it, but the distance I used was 0.01. Because, you know, it's not a deep thing. It's fabric. All we're trying to do is just kind of soften that edge up. And the other thing I did was I applied some smoothing to it, which, you know, just kind of smooths that edge out. So we'll just hook that up. It's going to hook it up to the normal, but we'll get rid of that. And the reason we're not seeing a height is because we haven't set it up here in the editor. So we're going to go into Materials, Default, Edit, and this lets you set up a bunch of things, including the height. And you can kind of see it, but we haven't put a normal in there yet, so that makes it difficult. And I think we'll just start from top to bottom, because we're essentially going to be making the same thing. Well, you know what? Let's put in a levels here, because we know it's not going to be that height. I'm just going to bring this all the way down, because it's just going to have the very slightest bit of bump, and that's quite literally our height map pretty much done. The way we're going to handle the rest of the nodes is going to be pretty much the same thing. So what I'm going to do is we're going to just start with the ambient occlusion, and then we can just, whatever we do with this, we're going to basically be able to cut and paste it and then just do minor tweaks to it. And it makes life very simple. I'm going to bring out a couple of level nodes, 3 to be exact. It's all on the same principle that we did the color here. And we're going to get a blend node. And there will be another blend node. Now, if we take a closer look at these two textures that we have here, they're pretty strong. We're going to need that sometimes, but we're also going to want kind of gentler versions of this as well. So I'm going to put a levels node in front of each one of these that will allow us to have basically two different kinds of versions of each of these grayscales. The other thing about this white noise is that, you know, if you look at it compared to what we have going on here, it's too big. I mean, the granules are still too big. So with this one, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to put a transform 2D node in between this, just to make this noise smaller. And I'm going to divide it by half. So we now have sort of darker and lighter versions of these two grayscale masks. So here we have the setup for our ambient occlusion, and we're going to hook each one of these from the lighter version of our two different types of, well, of our fabric, and then the noise that we're applying on top of the fabric. And let's see what happens if we multiply them. No. Let's try lighten. Multiply is probably the best. It's very muddy though, so we're going to have to fool around with this a little bit. I think I want this one lighter. Yeah. Let's take a look. I'm going to compare it to the original. Yeah, you see, it's giving us more of a kind of a fuzziness to it. And then we can hook that into the next one. And just like with the color, this will be off of our thread. But this time, I'm going to use the darker version, because what I want to have happen here is like to look like that metallic that we're going to put in there is kind of stitched in, and it's on the inside of this area here. So if we get these darker versions, it's going to make it look more like stitching, like that. So this can now be used for our ambient occlusion. And I'm just going to put it in straight like this. I don't think I'm going to actually run it through the AO node, because when I tried it in testing, it was too dark. Because, you know, this is like really subtle stuff, and I couldn't get the height low enough. But this is giving us enough so that it looks like it's, you know, once we apply the metallic to it, it'll look like stitching. And we're getting very, very slight variations to sort of pick up the highlights of the weave on the thicker stuff. Make a frame. So next up we have the normal. And here we're going to follow pretty much the same thing we've been doing all along, except instead of a levels node, I'm going to get a height to normal. And we can take a quick look to see what this will do for us. We're going to use the lighter of them, and without adjusting anything, let's just take a quick peek. Well, it's starting to look more like what we need it to look like, but you know, I've got these 3 different zones here, and I'd really like to have my, you know, this thinner fabric not be quite so rough. So what we're going to do is we're just going to follow the same pattern. We're going to duplicate out 2 more of these, and we'll have one set in for, actually, you know what, I'm not even going to bother, we're only going to need 1 more, because we don't really need to do this white noise. I don't think it's going to help the situation to have it. As far as normals go, I think it's probably going to muddy things up. If you want it extra fuzzy, you can go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to skip it. But we're going to blend these using this one right here. And this will allow us to, actually we do want a 3rd one. And that will be for our, and now we have that hooked up, we can come in here and start to manipulate the heights on these. So this is my roughest one here, because it's getting masked out by this mask. And this is our finer fabric. I'm going to change this height too. I want to, and you know what? I think I want to add this in as well, because these aren't kind of poofing out enough for my taste. So what we're going to do is we're going to take another blend node, and since we're getting, you know, this bonus normal map from here, we can actually overlay this stuff on top of it. Let's come back to our bevel, and we can bring this normal intensity just way down. And I think I'm going to make it a negative bevel. Yeah, it looks better. I didn't like the fact that it was coming out into this blue area. I kind of wanted to restrict it to just that pattern. But yeah, those heights are starting to look more like what we need them to look like now. Alright, so our height's done. Next we have the roughness. I'm going to save myself some trouble. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it. And we'll rename it roughness. But again, as a general rule for roughness maps, I'll take the other maps and invert them, because if you think about it, the higher areas of stuff tend to get worn a little bit more than the lower areas of stuff. So, you know, they tend to be a little bit less rough. And we can come into the library and get an invert grayscale, and we'll make 2 duplicates of that, and we'll just replace those connections and run them through these inverted nodes. Now this is all going to be all messed up, but because the levels are actually set for something completely different. But let's plug it in, and then we can start messing around with our levels. Okay, first up, oh, you know what we don't have here is our mask. So first up, we have these high areas. I'm going to change that to a copy. I'm thinking for this normal, I might add that white noise to the normal for these high areas. But let's finish with this roughness first. That's probably pretty good. And now we're moving down to the lower material, which is still very shiny. I mean, it's not a satin, so I don't really want it shiny. I had a satin before, which was pretty shiny, but this is just regular. I guess it's more like a linen. It's probably all right. And then our threading here, we actually want super shiny. Okay. I'm going to make this frame a little bit bigger, so everything fits onto it. And that's our roughness. And we can copy, I guess it's probably easier copying this one. And we'll rename this metallic. And we need to get rid of, well, we don't need to do anything really. We're going to just replace these guys with a black. And then we're going to get rid of that invert. Actually, we don't even need to do that because we've already got it set up pretty well. All we have to do is flip the script, because I do want there to be some variation in there. I think I want to see that color a lot lighter. Okay, there's a couple of things that I'm seeing that I don't like, and that's because this is I was following my notes, and this is a different kind of material than what I'm making as far as the textures that are happening here. And they're both pretty easy fixes. The first thing I mentioned, I want to add more fuzziness to these raised bits, so we're going to add white noise to the normal. And the other thing I'm not liking is the fact that this thread is kind of coming up on the bevel. So what we're going to need to do, we're actually going to need to add this mask to our height, because we're going to want to manipulate the heights so that this white area is the highest area of all. And again, that's just a question of doing some blending and a little bit of levels. So we'll leave the subsurface for last. I'm actually going to move that one up here. I think we've got more room going on up here. And let's make our fixes first. Okay, the normal. We want to make this fuzzier. So that means we want to apply this white noise in normal form, overlaying on top of what we've got going on here. So I think we'll probably just use a regular normal for this. And we'll get a blend node. And this is the one we're overlaying, because that is the top one. And we'll switch that to an overlay blend. And we need to apply the mask to it, because we don't want it all over. We just want it on those bits. And then we will replace this connector with what we just did. Yeah, I think that looks better. It looks more like a, you know, like it's made from like a knitty fabric, which was kind of what I was going for. But this still looks stupid. You know what I also realized? I don't think we changed this to, oh, we do have a round corner type. Okay. It's still very angular. I think we might put a blur in there, but let's see what happens after we've done those heights. All right, this is getting very crowded in here. I'm going to move this back. All right, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of space. So right now our height map is just what's coming straight out of here, running it through a levels node. Not entirely sure where this is going to play out in the end, but the first thing we need to do is to add our heights for that thread. And I'm going to use a lighten blend for this. And I'm going to put this levels node in here. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to get a new levels node. There's so many noodles here. That is my heights. That's my lighten blend. And I want this stuff much lower. So I'm going to put my levels in there. And we can darken this up. And then we'll just plug it in here to give us an overall height. Because this is going to apply to everything. And now we can, this will be like our global height control, and then we can do the specifics in here. It's an improvement, but that line is still very, very sharp. Also, I don't think I want this quite so deep. Because that's coming up like a really sharp ridge there, and I don't like that. And that's because of this. This is a very sharp line, which is why it's doing what it's doing. I'm going to get a high quality blur. And let's see whether we can't improve our line quality in here. That looks a bit better. And I want to see more white in here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Shift and pick up all of these at once and drop them on my new node. There's still something about this one. Oh, you know what I don't like about it? I think I want to get rid of the bumpiness on it. It worked the last time I did it, but it doesn't seem to be working now. I also want to make this more contrasting. Let's see what happens when we get rid of this bump on it. Where are we with our numbers? And let's bring the height down a little bit. I'm going to put another levels node in here, which will let me adjust the height specifically for those edges. Because now we're talking about the relative distance between these two. And this blur no longer seems quite so necessary. Okay, that's better. Maybe take this down a little bit more. Okay, well, you know what? You can fool around with it how you like. The method is the same. You know, we're just using blend nodes to be able to control all these things differently. But I think that's enough tweaking for now. The other thing I realized while I was doing this is that we haven't made a specular level node either for the specular level output, which I want to do now. And we can, I don't know, copy, I guess, the ambient occlusion. Okay, so let's start at this one. I think I want this one shinier, this blue, the sort of turquoise area. We want it to be a little bit more specular than the rougher bits. Oh, I don't have a mask on me. Okay, now that looks right. And in order for it to appear here, I'm going to view in 3D view, and I'm going to assign it specular level. All still very sharp. I think we're going to go back into Photoshop and soften the edges up in Photoshop. I think that might be part of the problem. So we'll leave this here for now, and I'll meet you in Photoshop.